Hi, I'm Claire. It is belatedly the 11th day in the 12 days of Clairemas, and today we're going to do a quick December reading wrap-up. It's going to be quick because I only read 3 things in December, and they were all things I had started in November. I was expecting to get a lot more reading done during the Christmas holidays, and I guess in the end I watched a lot of Netflix and read a lot of fan fiction, so you know, it's not exactly like I'm gonna complain, and I'm really glad that I managed to finish the things that I had started in November so I could start 2019 on like a blank fresh slate. And I'm just gonna tell you about the things that I did manage to finish, which were number 1, The Fated Sky by Mary Robinette Kowal. This is the 2nd book in her Lady Astronaut of Mars series. I guess it functions as a duology with The Calculating Stars, and then there's going to be more books in that universe, but they won't be like direct sequels because they won't be all about Elma York, I don't think. Anyway, if you haven't heard me rave about The Calculating Stars yet, this is a kind of like historical sci-fi series that takes place in the 50s, but there's been this apocalyptic event that basically changed the future of the whole world and meant that the space race had to be wildly accelerated. And so it's the 50s or 60s by the point the 2nd book starts, and Alma is like on a mission to Mars. Like there are big portions of this book where they are in a spaceship going to Mars. So I don't want to say much more than that because number 1, that's a cool enough description to make you want to read it if you didn't already know about it, and number 2, obviously spoilers, and it's the 2nd book in a series. I thought this worked really well as a sequel and as a continuation of the 1st book because some of the issues brought to the fore in the 1st book, like how do people in the world who do not work for NASA react at the idea that, you know, to save Earth we have to go into space. Like, how do regular people react to that? Do they believe it? Do they think it's real? Do they think it's fair? There are obviously people who want the government's resources to be allocated in different ways. The space program is struggling to like stay open and continue to be funded. There's all that kind of stuff, like the training of the astronauts has to be interrupted all the time for publicity stunts and things like that. So those things from the 1st book continue to be explored and are explored in more depth, and then there are some things that you could see were going to happen in the 1st book that do get developed. There are some plot shenanigans going on with one of the main like antagonists from the 1st book, who is another pilot who just hates Alma's guts. Some of the stuff I expected to happen did totally happen. Some of the stuff that was easy to call from the 1st book did come to pass exactly as I expected. And then there was another layer that was surprising and a punch to the gut. And again, this is a book that I think a lot of people either have already read or are going to read, because I fully anticipate this duology or Just Calculating Stars to be on a bunch of awards lists, so I don't want to give too many details. I'm sorry I'm being very vague. I really loved it, and I think it's definitely worth your while to pick it up and to pick up both of them. Like, this duology is great. Can't wait for more in the series. Next up, I finished Giant Days by Non Pratt. This is a novel based on the comic book series Giant Days, which I absolutely love and I've been reading for ages. So I definitely wanted to give the novel a go, even though it was quite weird to be reading about these characters in a different medium. This is the story of Susan, Daisy and Esther, 3 young women who start as first years at Sheffield University at the same time, and they share a dorm together, I think. They have one of these little apartments where each of them has a room, and then they share a kitchen, if I'm remembering correctly from like the layout that we get in the comics. In any case, Susan is a cynical pre-med student. Esther is a goth who is studying English, if I'm remembering correctly, and Daisy is an archaeology student and she's really enthusiastic about all the things but also quite naive and innocent. All three of them have this wonderful friendship that forms through the comic and so many adventures and stuff. I love those comics so much. So reading about those characters in a different medium was great because I love those characters. However, it was also weird because it's a different medium and it was unusual, you know, and it took a little while for me to get into, where at first the descriptions and all of that, like, it just felt very jarring to have text-based descriptions of those people as opposed to just a picture. Another thing that's a bit weird about reading this novel as a fan of the comic is that this novel takes place in their first few months at university, and now I'm a little bit behind on the comics. There are a couple of volumes I haven't read yet, but where I am in the comic now, they are already in their like second or third year. I can't remember exactly because I need to do a big reread and catch up with all of it. But in this book, they go through some of the stuff that they go through in the very early comics. For instance, Daisy is really homesick and she's calling her grandmother a lot, and then Susan is just figuring out how to deal with McGraw being on the same campus as her. They have this like contract for not talking to each other, which I can't remember if that was in the comic or not, but the whole thing where she pretends that she doesn't even know McGraw and that they were never friends, like, that's a big deal in this novel from Susan's point of view, and it's something that's been covered such a long time ago in the comics. And like, when you know what happens in the comics with Susan and McGraw, having her be like, oh, I don't want to talk to him, but maybe I do, and having this kind of hopeful back and forth between them is like a bit difficult because there's more stuff that happens. I don't know, it was really difficult for me to judge this outside of the context of the comic book. Would have I enjoyed it if I wasn't already a fan of the comic book? I can't tell for sure. Probably I would have enjoyed it because I fell in love with those characters in the comics, and I'm not sure why I wouldn't fall in love with them in the book. But I am way more excited about catching up with all of the comic book stuff and checking out early registration comics and stuff like that. So I think I will be keeping with the comics in future for Giant Days. And finally, in December, I read Witchmark by C.L. Polk. You will already know that I have absolutely loved this book if you saw my favorite books of 2018 video in which I featured it. This is a fantasy novel in which our main character, Dr. Miles Singer, is investigating some nefarious goings on with the magic in that world. We start the story in the hospital, in the Veterans Hospital, where Miles works as a doctor in psychiatry. A man is brought to the hospital as an emergency. He's dying and he's asking for Miles by name. When the dying man gets to Miles, he not only says to him, "I've been murdered, there was something in the tea, please avenge me," he also names him Sir Christopher, which no one is supposed to know is his real name. And also, as he dies, he gives Miles his magical aura and power. He wasn't really supposed to know that was a possible thing to do because Miles was hiding the fact that he was a witch, and he thought he was doing a pretty good job hiding the fact that he was a witch. Except this man clearly knew what was going on, and on top of that, the gentleman who helped the dying man to the hospital says to Miles, "Oh, I can definitely see your magical aura. Other people with magic will be able to see it too, but I can show you how to hide it if you trust me," which Miles is hesitant to do, even though the stranger is very hot. So this is how our story kicks off, and there is a lot more intrigue in there about the war and the veterans coming back from the war and like what ails them. There's a lot in there about the magic as well, who's allowed to do it, who's not allowed to do it, who's forced to do it. There is such a lot of cool world building in this story, and I also really enjoyed the characters. I absolutely loved Miles as a character, and Tristan, the man that brings the dying bloke to the hospital is also an amazing character. Their investigation together and the way that their friendship develops into something more and that they start to trust each other and fall in love with each other is just delightful. I absolutely love this book. I cannot wait for the next book in the series, which is going to be about a character we meet quite a bit further down in the novel, so I don't want to talk too much about her, but she's a journalist and she's going to be very investigative in the next book, and she's going to have a romance with Miles' sister, so that's going to be really, really cool. And like, talk about a book where at the end of the first book there is like a proper like shift, seismic change in the world. Like, it does not pull its punches. It gets pretty dark by the end, but I think it really works with like the kind of things that have been established as realities in that world. The second book is called Grey Star and it comes out in 2019. I'm super excited to read that as well. So that's it. Those were the books that I read in December of 2018. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments below what you read in December and what you finished the year with. I hope it was on a high, and I hope you've got loads more good reading planned for 2019. If you'd like to see more from me, you can check out a previous video on screen right now. And if you haven't yet, please hit the subscribe button that's on my face for a new video from me every week. I've been Claire, thanks so much for watching, and see you soon.